In 1999, Morpheus offered Neo a choice between a red pill and a blue pill. In 2018, this country fractured between red and blue. In 2022, I'm here to tell you that if you really want the truth, more voters are neither red or blue. Yet, they have no representation, no choice, and no options. They have to choose between candidates chosen by the red people or the blue people. I'm David Esrati, and I'm running for Congress as an American, as in red, white, and blue. I'm a veteran, an activist, and a small businessman. I'm asking you to join me in reminding the professional politicians in Congress who their bosses are. I support ranked choice voting, campaign finance reform, and a verified voter information system, all so we can stop having the best politicians money can buy. It's time to elect a veteran who will work for you, no matter what color they want to label you. Please go to electesrati.com and learn more. I'm David Esrati, and I approve this message. Jurassic Park, you thought those little baby dinosaurs were cute until they turned into out-of-control carnivores. That's sort of what happens to government when we elect people based on very expensive advertising campaigns and propaganda. I'm David Esrati. I'm a veteran and a small businessman running for Congress. You don't want professional ad people and pollsters to sway your vote. All those hot-button issues like gun control, abortion, borders are all politicized to stop you from voting rationally. And thinking rationally seems to be in short supply these days. Most Americans have been voting against their own best self-interest for a long time because we've allowed money to buy our leaders. 1 million Americans died in the last 2 years because our leaders couldn't lead. It wasn't that hard. Mask, distance, test, and then vaccinate. In an instant, we had billions to spend on healthcare for COVID, when for years we've been told we can't provide healthcare for everyone equally in this country. That's an unintended consequence of the pandemic. If you think about it, our government can pretty much do whatever it wants, or what the people who buy our politicians tell our leaders to do. We also had a ton of money to prop up businesses. The next thing you know, it turns out that a living wage was not. It's been a while since I've been live, and the reason I'm here is I've got some things to talk about. And I don't know if we're going to get anybody here because nobody else. One person is here. If you'd like, please drop your name in the comments. Love to hear who's out there. But this is important stuff, and this video will be up for other people to look at and watch. But the real topic that has me a little ticked off right now is breaking news versus broken news. Now, a friend of mine says that whether it's important or it's relevant is something you got to figure out. Or interesting or relevant, what's more important? And I'm not going to get into the details, but you know, there's going to be a bunch of hubbub for a while about a woman who didn't get a slice of cheese on her Big Mac and got punched in the face by the Butler Township police. And while that might be interesting to most of us, it's not really relevant. There's important things that happen, and we don't hear about them anymore. We've heard about fake news. We've heard about a breakdown in news. How else do you explain George Santos getting elected to Congress despite being a total fraud? New York Times is all up on their high horse right now telling us all the things about Santos and how he shouldn't be seated in Congress, but dudes, it was your job to expose them, and you didn't. This is what happens when we have huge shrinkages in newsrooms across the country, because we have mega companies getting mega rich off of serving up other people's content for free and not paying the people who make it. Like me. Nobody's paying me for putting this video up or any of the other videos I've put up in the past. Nobody is compensating me for the time I spend writing the news stories that I publish on my blog, but you read them. Somewhere along the line, we need to see a way to make sure people get paid for what they do and the value of it. But Santos, people knew what was wrong. There were small independent journalists like me who said the guy's a total fraud. The real question is, how did the Republican National Committee and anybody stand there and say this is a guy that should be in Congress? Anybody who didn't do their homework or was so desperate. And that includes Kevin McCarthy. So, to update you, yes, I am running for Congress still in 2024. But one of the things I learned is, unless you're elected already or have a ton of money because you've sold out, nobody's going to cover you. Even WYSO, our great independent local public radio station, instead of interviewing me, they interviewed some douchebag from the Dayton Daily News who told you his douchebag views and considered that news. I'm not saying his name because he's not really relevant. He can't report his way out of a paper bag, and yet he gets paid tons of money and misses the good stuff. Like what kind of good stuff? Well, in the last month or so, I've unloaded a few great articles. And you should check them on my website. The links are down below here, and we're going to talk about some of those things. So let's start out with what I call, one other thing. I'm running for City Commission this year, and I need your signature. If you're a registered City of Dayton voter, stop down to office between 9 and 6 and sign your name. It'd be a real big help instead of me coming to your door to make sure I get good signatures, because our lovely Board of Elections, who's also corrupt, they like to double check my signatures like nobody else's. We have 2 viewers. Great. I'd love to see who you are. Drop a note in the chat. This is live. There's a way to interact. So, Hoodiegate. Let's talk about Hoodiegate. The last meeting of the Dayton School Board of 2022, all of a sudden, the treasurer says she'd like to have this allocation for $68,000 voted on so they can buy hoodies for all the high school students. And Joe Lacey says, I'd like to have that voted on separately. Well, good for you, Joe. You caught something. And what did you catch? You caught the fact that they never allocated the $68,000 for the hoodies. And it also came out that Libby Lawley had gone and spent $68,000 for hoodies. And they were already in production without any approval from the board. This, friends, is illegal. And Libby Lawley should have been fired right then and there with cause for breaking the law. But it gets better, because 4 of them, even after they realized they'd screwed up, Chrysonda Goodwine says, this isn't protocol, but we should do it anyway. She's an attorney. Maybe she should be disbarred, because the law is the law for a reason. And 4 of them vote to appropriate the hoodies. The 2 no votes were Joe Lacey and Jocelyn Reinert. So, here is the superintendent spending $68,000 on hoodies without approval. They're in production. Did they get RFPs? Did they put out an RFP? Did they get bids? Or did they just dig into it? I've got more to dig in on that to give you the answer, but the fact is they broke the law. So, parlay this a little further forward. I already knew about a lawsuit that had been filed by a guy named Bob Parks, who owns one of my fellow advertising agencies. Bob's a really nice guy. His wife is delightful. Her name's Lori Parks. Files a lawsuit against the Kettering School Board and the Educational Service Center. Educational Service Center, you should know, is a giant slush fund where superintendents retire and then go and work there and double dip and get huge paychecks doing pretty much nothing. They're supposed to manage simple stuff like supplying school pathologists and speech pathologists and some other extracurricular type or extra supportive services for schools and some consulting. And of course, Nan Whaley's husband works for these goobs as a interim treasurer or as a stand-in treasurer. Anyways, things totally funded with tax dollars and totally no oversight. But Scott Inskeep, the superintendent of the Kettering schools, signs a contract with Mr. Parks saying, I want you to rebrand and market our schools and make us look good and everything. And don't worry, we don't have to have the school board vote on this because we'll just run it through a grant from the Educational Service Center. So Parks signs a contract, so does Inskeep. Then Inskeep signs for the Educational Service Center. There's a whole bunch of emails back and forth. There's only one tiny little problem here. Remember I said Bob Parks has a really nice wife named Lori Parks? Well, she's on the Kettering School Board. No bid contract goes to her husband, paid for without an certificate of allocation, which is what we were told you need for the hoodies, which they didn't have. They go and spend major money with Bob Parks. How major? You got a check for $37,000 to get started. He got a check for $100,000. He got a check for $60,000. And then he got a check for $17,000. And he had filed a lawsuit saying, you guys owe me like another $81,000, especially when you broke the contract before it was completed. Because somewhere along the line, Superintendent Inskeep just says, oh, I don't think I want to be a superintendent anymore. I want to go run a nonprofit. Well, there's more on that part of the story. Trust me. I'll get to that soon in another story. We'll flesh that out. But the reality is, Parks probably was told to leave because he broke the law. How do I know he broke the law? Well, in the time that I didn't write about it when I first read the lawsuit, it had been resolved in record time. Like, Parks filed in October or November, and it was done by December. Nothing happens that quick. Hell, look, Aaron Hartley still hasn't been sentenced for a conviction of assault. And he's still got his license suspended, but he's still walking around free and clear. That is wrong. Aaron Hartley, by the way, is a douchebag lawyer from Kettering who likes to have sex with his clients and even marry some of them and bilk them out of money. He also has problems with drugs. Also, he said on social media that he would put a bullet in the head of a magistrate. If I wrote that, I would be in jail, but no, he's still driving around in his G-Wagon. Because we protect lawyers in this community. We protect people who are corrupt in this community. Because they're all in it together. Because we run on the friends and family plan. So anyways, Inskeep resigns. Nobody saw this coming because the guy's relatively young. They thought they had a few more years out of him. Well, he ends up running a nonprofit in Cincinnati. They go to start looking for a new superintendent. And there's an email from the treasurer on August 1st, the day of the resignation. Hey, Bob, screw you. We're not giving you another dime. We're not having a contract with you. And in the lawsuits, the responses from both ESC and from the Kettering School Board, they said it wasn't even a valid contract. All those paperwork, all the emails that go back and forth, all those checks that were cut, and none of it was a legitimate contract, they're saying. Well, I took business law, and if I have a written document and you sign it, that's one part of it. But if you actually send money as per the contract, it's binding. No, they're saying no, he didn't have a certificate of appropriation, so none of this was binding, and it should be dismissed. And note, the ESC and the Kettering schools spent a lot of money on this defense of Inskeep, and the taxpayers paid the price. So we now know that if you are the superintendent of the Kettering schools and your wife is a school board member and you have an ad agency, you're entitled to about $200,000, no bid to do jack all for all we know at this point. But nobody gets prosecuted. Nobody gets trotted out by the FBI as corrupt. You know, Roshon Winburn only took about $6,000 in cash in a bag. Joey Williams only had a $40,000 patio built. And Brian Higgins on the trumped up BS about insurance fraud, the total amount at best was 120,000, and here we got somebody with 200,000. Where's the FBI today? Why aren't they rolling these people out talking about a culture of corruption in Kettering? I can tell you why. They're white. We don't prosecute white people in power in this town. How else do you explain $130 million going missing from Wright State and not a single person indicted? Not a single one. The feds come in and they fine the school. So the government fines the government, and then the school pays the feds. What did that do? Who took responsibility? Who got in trouble? Who got fired? I'm just wondering what the hey is going on. And I see I-70's back, and he's saying, keep explaining the crooks in Dayton. I'll do that all day long, just for you. Anyways, so I write this story. You haven't seen it in the Dayton Daily. The Hoodie Gate story, they finally got around to writing that and saying there was a bit of a hubbub, but didn't really point any figures and say any laws were broken or anything else. But it gets better because I write about Libby Lawley resigning. Well, not resigning, saying she's not going to be renewed and she's done with Dayton. And I did great things. I became superintendent of the year. I'm fantastic. She did that at the reorg meeting on January 10th. They wrote the story all the way 4 days after I wrote it, a week late. I wrote it on Sunday. They got it on Tuesday or Wednesday, and of course they didn't give me credit for it because that's the Dayton Daily News. Now, what's more interesting is they did it at the reorganization meeting, and that is I've got the video queued up. It's a classic clusterfuck Dayton Public School style. Excuse me, did I say that word? I did. Anyway, they start out with just trying to figure out who's going to be the president and sit in the middle seat. And Miss Reinard makes sure she lets everybody know that Will Smith somehow did something sexually inappropriate to her, and why is he going to become the vice chairman? Well, no, it went on. They had that little discussion. It ended up being Chrysanda Goodwine to be the president, and Will become the vice president because Dion didn't want it. And they moved on, and she moved as far away from Will as she could over to the side, and they have their they finished their reorg, but in that she asked, well, why didn't anybody call me? We all call each other and discuss things like this beforehand. And you didn't call me. Well, right there, Jocelyn admitted that the standard practice of the Dayton City School Board, Dayton Public Schools School Board, is to round robin, which is illegal according to the Sunshine Laws. You cannot round robin. You cannot talk to each other outside. You do your business in the meeting, period. But no, she says that. And Will says, oh, stop with this. We already spent enough money on legal already. And the question is, why were they spending money on legal? He has to defend himself. If they've spent it, they've got a decision, and she's not privy to it, we got another problem. But they go into executive session. They have another one of their classic 4-hour meetings. They come out, even though it wasn't on the agenda, they come say, oh, we're giving Libby a 5% retroactive raise because it was in her contract. It was supposed to start in August. We're going to give it back to August. This woman literally broke the law 3 weeks ago buying these hoodies, and they're giving her a raise and giving it to her retroactively. But here's the really stinky, smelly, vile part. They did it without ever telling the public they were going to do it. There was no chance for public input. They didn't do it at a business meeting. They did it at their reorg meeting after coming out of executive session. There is no pressure to pass this on this date unless we're getting ready to fire Libby or she's going away, and they just wanted to make sure she got it before she's gone or indicted or arrested by the next meeting, which is the third Tuesday of the month. It's the business meeting. They should all be removed from office. I'd file a lawsuit, but you know what? Sunshine lawsuits don't work in this county. One, it costs you $400 to file. You can't find an attorney to represent you. If you did find an attorney to represent you and you win, you're supposed to get your attorney fees back. Well, that doesn't work for me because there are putzes like Gerald Parker on the bench who decide not to pay my attorney fees. And that's okay with the Ohio Sunshine laws. Speaking of which, I had filed against the Board of Elections. Board of Elections is a shit show. Sarah Greathouse / Sarah, I can't remember what her main name that she's reverting to, is resigning or retiring or being removed or being indicted, I don't know, from the Board of Elections. We're going to have a new Democratic director because she's on her way out. But I filed a lawsuit almost a year ago about their Academy Award style schedules that they send out. They don't send out an agenda that you can actually tell what they're going to do. They send out a schedule which says we're going to meet, we're going to do this, this, and this, and we're going to adjourn. This, and this being, we're going to talk about candidates, we're going to talk about some rule, and we're going to talk about contracts, but we don't tell you what any of those are. That is not an agenda, folks. So I filed a lawsuit. And don't you know it, I have to do all the work myself because I can't get a lawyer to do it. I can't afford a lawyer, and I wouldn't get paid back. And they catch me on Civil Rule 56, which is lawyer speak, and go on and on about how I failed to present evidence that was showing that this was untrue. Well, I thought we did that in court, but no, we're not going to get to court because the judge dismissed it. And he got down into the letter of the law and said there's a difference between special meetings and regular meetings, and only one, according to, has to have an agenda. No, it's the spirit of the law. And you don't get to redefine everything. Just because legislators can't write everything out in every extension, you're supposed to interpret the law in a way that adheres to openness and using the English language to mean if you're supposed to provide an agenda, you provide an agenda. I cited examples of lawsuits where the agenda was insufficient. No, those don't count. I showed Ohio Administrative Code where an agenda is actually spelled out. Oh, no, that's not relevant. So I have to go and make a case to an appeals court. And this will probably end up going to the Ohio Supreme Court. Because the English language gets manipulated when it comes to protecting politicians. So, there we go. Oh, I forgot to mention. There's this guy, Nick Herkman, who is their community page editor of the Dayton Daily News. I submitted a cogent 600-word essay talking about why Sinclair shouldn't be entering the market for BSNs. That's a 4-year degree for nurses. They're offering it not in continuation as their 2-year program. They're in addition. You can't just go all 4 years. You go 2 years, you go work, you come back, and you do the other 2 years. Now, why are they getting into the BSN program? Because there's money involved. What kind of money? Well, Premier doesn't have their own teaching school like Kettering does, and they want their nurses to have BSN, so they want a cheap place to do it where it's subsidized by you, the taxpayers, and so Sinclair is offering that program. It's funny, because UD just got into the BSN program. Wright State already had a BSN program. We've got a shortage of 2-year RNs. Why are we using resources to teach a 4-year when there's a waiting list between 6 months and a year to get into the RN program? We need RNs now. Nick wouldn't let me comment because I'm not an RN and I'm not affected. Well, I wrote something for an RN and some other people and explained it for the taxpayers how Steve Johnson and his Sinclair machine is ripping you off, and Herkman doesn't think it belongs in the paper or you should know. So I've got that story on there too. So, what's the cost of not having real journalists? We get sidetracked with, oh my God, they're kids running wild in the streets, driving around in circles downtown, and the politicians don't know what to do. And we got Miss, I need my extra cheese on my Big Mac, and she gets punched in the face by basically a loser cop in Butler Township. Butler Township shouldn't even have their own police force, folks. We have a sheriff. We should just have one police department for the whole county. I understand the sheriff sucks, but having all these police chiefs doesn't make us safer. It just costs us more. Anyway, so we're going to read about those things. We're not going to read about where the tax dollars get wasted like at Sinclair with this BSN program. We get screwed everywhere we turn around. So, the cost of independent journalism, the cost of not having good journalism, is you pay more in taxes. You pay more with bad representation and illegal behavior by people in office, from George Santos on down to Scott Inskeep and Lori Parks, who the paper said, oh, she's just resigning because she wants to be a realtor. No, she's resigning because she had to. The truth hurts, Kettering. You're just as bad sometimes as Dayton. So, I spend my time doing this stuff. I spend my time running for office. I spend my time running an ad agency. I spend my time doing live streams like this. Why? Because I believe an informed electorate gets a better government. I think we need a voter information system. I think we need to have people understand who these candidates are, what's going on, and we need to know what they're doing in their meetings and that they're doing it legally. We can't have people at every single school board meeting monitoring this stuff. I used to try doing it just for Dayton. It wore me out because they have 4-hour meetings, 6-hour meetings. They even have slideshows where there's nothing on the slides, and they sit there and watch that. But without journalists, we don't have a chance at ending corruption. So, even if you don't like me politically, please subscribe to my blog. Go to Esrati.com/subscribe. Subscribe. Start reading the posts. Go through there. Read the must-reads. There's a category there that'll be just must-reads. Read some of the stuff I've done since 2005. And if you like it, support it. There's a way you can donate just for helping me to offset the costs of some of the time and the money that I invest in digging into these things. I've got a few people who do that. Every month I get an automatic check. It's great. It's not enough to cover my costs or anything else. But before you give money to, St. Jude or, some other big charity, realize every dime you give me is money that gives me the ability to write these things, put these videos together, do these exposés, go to the meetings, run the camera, talk to people, get people telling me things because they're afraid to step forward and say, hey, Scott Inskeep was a crook. Libby Lawley broke the law. How do you think I find these things out? Last but not least, my friend Brian Higgins, who was indicted in the culture of corruption case and spending 3 years in the federal pen right now because Judge Rose decided to edit the story that was given to the jury. I cover that in this article, but I also have his appeal for you to read. Now, the appeal could only deal with what was done in the courtroom, and I explain exactly what Rose did to make sure that Higgins was as unsavory as he could be. What was edited out, the resources he was denied, it's fascinating. But again, it comes down to, why is Brian Higgins doing 3 years in prison? And Scott Inskeep is running a nonprofit in Cincinnati, and Libby Lawley's getting a raise. Can somebody explain this stuff to me? Please? Because it's not okay only to indict black people. It's not okay not to have Wright State just forget about the $130 million that disappeared. It's not okay for George Santos to be in Congress, no matter what Mike Turner thinks. And all this stuff about now, Biden and his security papers, I have no problems. Pull him out of office. Get rid of Biden. Throw Trump in jail, put them in cells right next to each other, have Hunter off to the side. I don't care. Let's get to the point where people are actually accountable for what they do in office. Let's realize that all this smoke and mirrors and distractions, no member of Congress has to worry about the cost of insulin. Citizens do. Americans die because Congress fails to act because they have money. Where did the money come from for George Santos? Lock him up. Lock the people who gave him money up that were covered up. Let's have true election reform and have campaign finance registration instead of just voter registration. Donors have to register, not just voters. Because who bought your politician makes a difference. There's one story that I just couldn't get over that I read in the New York Times the other day. For the poor people who want to become cooks or work in a kitchen at fast food places, they have to take a course called Serve Safe. It's really stupid. It's pretty simple, common sense stuff, but you have to get the certification, and it costs $15. Turns out the people that administer that are lobbying to make sure that people in restaurants don't get a minimum wage. How does that happen? The system is rigged to screw the poor. We are at an absolute nadir here where we can't get any lower. We've screwed them with these interest rate hikes by the Fed. We are doing everything we can to make sure the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Go back and look at my Monopoly ad and understand that the whole purpose of Monopoly was to show when somebody gets all the money, the game stops. We are so close to the game stopping. Let's put it back on the tracks. It's time to move forward. And by the way, I'm interested in the Forward Party, but they don't have their act together in Ohio. Otherwise, I'd be getting signatures for them already. And check them out. They're pushing ranked choice voting. They're pushing some voter education things. They're redistricting, so it's not gerrymandered. It's led by Andrew Yang, something to look into. I've been rambling for long enough. Thank you for those who stuck with me and stayed in. I can always count on I-70. I didn't get any comments from anybody else. I'd love to know who was here. But these will not be daily during the city commission race, but they might be weekly. I don't know which day we're going to do it. Probably, maybe Tuesdays. We'll do Tuesdays at 4 and do that. But right now I've got to focus on getting signatures. I really appreciate you. Please share this video with people if you enjoyed it, or talk about it, or share the posts, or go on the blog, and you can donate, but make sure you subscribe to this so you know right away when I come online. And thank you so much for watching. Democracy takes work. It takes participation, and you guys are participating. So hats off to you. Even I-70, who's a Trumper, was there on January 6th type. It takes all of us to get this thing straightened out, and I appreciate all of you. Thanks.